I want to touch on the roles that you play with younger people from backgrounds where they're slightly more socially, economically challenged, and encouraging them to move into professions. Now, I know you also work in technology and a big advocate in technology. Now, I'm hugely curious as to your views on technology in law.
Yeah.
We've seen cases where AI has been used to identify people. Subsequent arrests have taken place, mistaken identity, and that tends to be prevalent across more BAME communities because technology has been built in a biased way.
Yeah.
We know this now, but the reality is because we don't have representation in society, this is happening.
Yeah.
That can be dangerous. What's your thoughts and views on that, please?
Yeah, I think that we need to encourage more BAME representation in technology especially, mainly because I think the more people you have at the table, the more you can manipulate the technology to be beneficial to the wider community, if you like. And so it is right that if you haven't got black coders who understand nuances, it is going to be wrong. The trouble is making sure that those communities feel as if technology is for them. I mean, you know, there is a massive, for instance, ethnic pay gap. So, and there's a massive, well, Serena Williams is investing in, you know, tech companies, presently specific BAME entrepreneurs. But I think technology, particularly with the law, is a really important role to play. And I think that actually it can really revolutionise the industry. I think actually our sector is a bit behind. So personal injury, for example, where you're working out the value of claims, which is largely insurance-based, just by way of example, largely insurance-based. Well, actually, do we need lawyers for that, or can we work out, you know, if a driver of a certain age and less experienced, they're more likely to have an accident, yes. And if they have an accident, what sort of damage will there be? You can work that out fairly and therefore calculate the remedies at the end. Do we need lawyers and large law firms to do that? I don't think so. And so, actually, in terms of the law, I think that we can use technology to our advantage. So one of the things there that I think is that actually the law and cyber law and technology law is behind. We're not regulating social media and so on and so forth sufficiently. And actually, I'm really interested in coding and where does liability lie with driverless cars, for example. Is it with the engineers, is it with the coders, or is it with the software company? And I think that actually, one, the law is behind in regulating that, so we need more people who understand the laws to apply to the changing technology. And I think we need law firms to really think about the impact of technology, because I'm very pro-technology. I think the impact of robots are coming, and I don't think we're going to really need paralegals. I'm not sure we're going to need, you know, quite expensive provision of legal services, for example, when you can cut a lot of that out. And when people say, well, we're always going to need lawyers, yes, we are, but it's a type of lawyers. And so I think that actually our sector is behind in adopting sufficient technology, but actually I think it's an advantage. And I think that actually the tech companies like yours that can really use us. And in a way, we need to work together really on that. But I don't think there's going to be sufficient jobs in law now. In 10 years' time, I think the technology is going to take over. And not only as sort of draftsmen and women, just to use that term loosely, do we need to get on board with that. But we need to really think about the cyber security and cyber law and what that actually means.
Even more reason for it to have true representation.
Exactly.
Technology that's going to be influencing decisioning. I think what I find particularly interesting about the law profession is that law tends to, and I'm sure you'll correct me, layperson's terms, law tends to come into being after something monumental has happened. And you talked about driverless cars. You know, we see new laws being brought in, tends to be after significant disasters to protect it from happening again.
Yes.
We know that principally driverless cars clearly poses a risk. Our logic tells us that.
Yes.
Is the law profession being asked to look at that now?
Yeah, I think there is a committee at which the Lord Chancellor has set up, which is really looking at the court system. I can't remember who's on the committee, but it's really looking at the role of technology in the courts. And you're right, usually we are reactive rather than proactive. You know, a dog bites somebody in Hyde Park. Well, we need a law to deal with that, rather than thinking ahead. And so the law is but it's trying to find people who understand the law as it is present sufficiently to deal with those and draft more laws to deal with the incoming issue. So, for example, if we have young people taking their own lives, which shouldn't be happening, which makes me sad because of well-being and mental health problems and so on, that's not right, full stop. But we need to hold actually those platforms who are advertising in a way that means that more young people, girls and boys, are taking their life. We need to take them to account, and so we need to regulate them in a way that they've not been regulated before. But you need people who understand that. So I don't want to name them. We all know who they are. But if the truth be known, actually, we need to change the laws. If you're under 18, for example, you can't open an account without having a secondary login, for example, adult parental. So the parental guide and the safeguard is that they can have access to your account at any time. So that actually in those awful traumatic cases where there is a trauma, there is a death or whatever it is, the coroner can actually look at the full evidence in the cases and actually say, well, was there a contributory factor in some of those platforms in the way they were behaving or not? Or actually, were there other issues, were there difficulties? Because now actually we're left in a bit of a gap, which is guessing, and our profession in the law are behind. We should be thinking about laws that we can implement to actually obtain the information in the worst serious scenarios, but even in the most basic scenarios of the issues that are arising. And so, because what happens is what we saw when Facebook was being cross-examined in America, people who were asking questions of Mark Zuckerberg who didn't understand the technology and who didn't understand how Facebook worked, who didn't understand how algorithms work and how you can access algorithms, and actually the different platforms that actually Facebook owns, which means that they have more access to one's data in the main. So we need to really get on board with that and understand the privacy laws and implement them in a way that means that when you're asked to accept the terms, you actually understand what you're accepting, and we don't all just click it to get rid of it so we can actually make a purchase or get on with whatever we want to do. Do you know what I mean?
Which is all done.
Yes, exactly. And that's okay to do that, so long as people understand. Don't complain about a breach of your rights or GDPR when you've actually accepted those rights quite properly on a commercial basis because the terms stipulate that. And that's really where I think our profession has opportunities. So yes, the robots are coming and AI is taking over. But actually, I think there's a real opportunity in the law for us to really understand and draft new laws and amend them slightly so that we're actually on top of the changing technology, because it's changing really quickly and I don't think we're on top of it. And to allow companies to legitimately trade. I don't think we should always be penalising companies who are commercially trading because lay people haven't always understood the law.